my dad had several Springsteen vinyl records growing up, and he would play them occasionally. And I can't really pinpoint the first time, like the moment that I heard Bruce and it changed my life or anything like that. I'm sure I heard many of the songs growing up, but one moment I can point to is I will always remember I was in, I believe, eighth grade, and it kind of blows my mind thinking about my junior high now, knowing what happened there, and I'll kind of get into that. But when I was in eighth grade, I remember my math teacher put in Greatest Hits, and this was, right around the time Greatest Hits came out. It was in the mid 90s. And I remember hearing the sound of his guitar on Born to Run. I can vividly remember sitting in that classroom and thinking his guitar sounded so unique. I had never heard a song that sounded quite like Born to Run. And I do remember going home, and I knew my dad had Springsteen's Greatest Hits, and I got it out that day and I started listening to it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and joining me tonight is a fellow podcaster, a Bruce fan, and he just shared with me right before I hit record that he talks a little Elvis every once in a while, so we may have to get into that. With Mac Davis just dying, there's a Elvis connection there. But Ryan Droste, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it. Appreciate you having me on, Jesse. It should be a good time.
Yeah, so tell us a little about yourself.
I live in the great state of Iowa. I am 36 years old, and my day job is I'm a U.S. history teacher. I teach 8th and 9th grade U.S. history. But then on the side, I also do some writing. I cover the professional wrestling industry for comicbook.com and really all combat sports as well. I do a little bit on UFC there as well. And like you said, obviously a huge Bruce Springsteen fan, also a big Elvis Presley fan. I do a podcast on the wrestling industry. It's called Top Rope Nation. It is through the Blue Wire Podcasting Network, and I've been doing that for a little over 4 years now with two of my best friends, and that's been a lot of fun, just kind of seeing that grow. And then I guest on an Elvis Presley podcast called Tcv Cast. I'm kind of their unofficial third host, I guess you could say, and I come on there every month or two, and actually I'll be recording a show with them this weekend, so you can look for that one soon as well.
Very cool. Please reach out to them. That I would love to have them join me on the podcast. I was recently told by a listener who is a new listener. He says, you say you do a Bruce Springsteen podcast. I think you just do a podcast where you talk to people, and the host just happens to love Bruce Springsteen. So I would love to have them talk about Elvis and share about their podcast. So please try to hook us up and make a connection.
Absolutely. I'll tell them this weekend.
Yeah. All right. So, Ryan, I always like to start at the beginning. So talk to me growing up. What kind of music did your family listen to? Did they listen to a lot of music?
Yeah, both my mom and dad, really musical people. I guess they gave me a pretty good schooling on the history of rock and roll and pop music. I would say growing up in my younger years, like elementary school, kind of into junior high, it was a lot of 1950s and 1960s rock and roll. That's pretty much what I was raised on. I also got really into Garth Brooks around that age too, like everyone did. I mean, I'm talking like the early 90s. So
sure, absolutely.
Late 80s, early 90s. So I was really into Garth Brooks during that period. But as you would guess from that intro, I was a huge Elvis fan. Both my mom and dad loved Elvis, and I really gained an appreciation for his music growing up. And he was my all-time favorite singer, and it still is. I mean, Elvis and Bruce are like 1A and 1B for me. Easily the top two.
So my Elvis story, I have a couple. My sister adores Elvis. That is by far her favorite entertainer. And so when Chris, who's my son, we were talking before we hit recorded, he's now, 31, but when he was like 10 or 11, um, we went on a extended family vacation, and the first stop we did was Memphis, and we toured Graceland. And I enjoyed it, but Chris was fascinated by it. The idea that you could not go upstairs in Graceland was like something that just scratched at him. And, we bought an Elvis CD, and we listened to it on the rest of the trip. He still, if we get in the car, he will jump in, he will turn Sirius to the Elvis channel.
Mm-hmm.
And, he he has a wide range of music, now. I mean, he listens to a lot of different kind of music. Um, Specifically a lot of wrestling theme, entrance songs that we will
Oh,
talk
nice.
about in a
There we
little
go.
bit. Yes. So anyway, that's my Elvis story. He just adores Elvis, and so I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, sounds like my kind of guy.
Yeah. Did
Yeah.
and I have never seen this, but I've often talked about that I would love to find a really good um, Elvis impersonator and have them do Fire,
Mm.
because Bruce wrote that for Elvis, to see someone really do it well. I think that would just be a cool thing to do.
Yeah, that is such an interesting story. Over on TCB Cast, they do what they call Song of the Week, and
Yeah.
every week the hosts pick a song and you tell the whole backstory of the song, who wrote it, who they write it for, Elvis in the studio, how did he work through that and everything. And one of the times I was on, I actually did Fire. You can find that in the archives. And I mean, like, there's no way to prove if Elvis ever heard it or not. Probably not. But I mean, you can totally hear him singing that when you hear Bruce do it. Like, it would totally fit just the way he sang songs.
And there is there's an alternate universe where the Colonel allowed Elvis to be co-star with Barbra Streisand,
Hmm.
and A Star Is Born, and that because of that he was in a little better health, took care of himself a little bit better, and that he did get that, and that we got Elvis doing Fire, and it hit the charts. I like to think of that world.
Yeah, same. It's really, I mean, it's too bad. Everyone knows the story, but I think Colonel Parker, for him early in his career, he made a lot of good connections for him, but he definitely kind of, I would say by the 70s, he was holding him back creatively, and it's super unfortunate, what happened there. One of the things I like about TCB Cast is the podcast really it concentrates on the movies and the music. It doesn't dive too much into the scandals and the drug use and just the over the top personality of Elvis. It's really more focused on him as an artist, and I think that was something that was really really missing in the coverage of him over the years. I think just growing up an Elvis fan, like you see this guy that was such a groundbreaking musician and just so ultra talented. He didn't write his own music, because a lot of people that era didn't write their own music, but he certainly was involved in kind of crafting the songs and producing the songs how he wanted them to be. And they were oftentimes much different than the originals. And just I don't think he gets his due as a creative force in music. And I think that's what Justin and Gurdeep over at TCB Cast and myself, when I'm on, we try to really talk about that side of his career.
I'm gonna check that out. I don't know if you've ever listened to Andrew Hickey's A History of Rock and Roll in 500 Songs.
I have. They've actually done a little bit of. They've done some collaboration. Andrew
Oh,
has
nice.
he had Justin Gurdeep from TCB Cast on his show, and he has been on theirs as well. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
super, really well put together show.
absolutely. Well, he was nice enough to visit with me, and I was gonna, in case you had not heard, because I asked him that question about Elvis and doing, A Star Is Born, and he gave his theory that Elvis, he thought, was actually had underlying health issues and may not have lived that much longer anyway. And one of the questions I asked him, I said, when I listen to your episodes where you talk about Elvis, by far, Colonel Parker is the villain in the story. And Andrew said, yes, absolutely. In my mind, he is the thing. And I think you make a valid point, right? That maybe early in the career he was doing things, but he made decisions like Elvis would have loved to tour Europe and never had the chance because the Colonel didn't want that. And yeah, I'm going to have to check out that podcast as if I thank you, like I'm already running out of time doing stuff, but I will have to check that out.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
you're loving Elvis. How did you find Bruce?
So my dad had several Springsteen vinyl records growing up, and he would play them occasionally. And I can't really pinpoint the first time, like the moment that I heard Bruce and it changed my life or anything like that. I'm sure I heard many of the songs growing up, but one moment I can point to is I will always remember I was in, I believe, eighth grade, and it kind of blows my mind thinking about my junior high now, knowing what happened there, and I'll kind of get into that. But when I was in eighth grade, I remember my math teacher put in greatest hits, and this was, right around the time greatest hits came out. It was in the mid 90s. And I remember hearing the sound of his guitar on Born to Run. I can vividly remember sitting in that classroom and thinking his guitar sounded so unique. Like I had never heard a song that sounded quite like Born to Run. And I do remember going home, and I knew my dad had Springsteen's greatest hits, and I got it out that day and I started listening to it. But then as I got through high school and everything, it wasn't something that I was constantly going back to. Like I would listen to it occasionally. And then when I was in high school is when the reunion tour happened. And then when Live in New York City came out on HBO right after that, I do remember watching that with my dad. I was still living at home at the time. And we watched that, and I remember him telling me, how Bruce was this legendary live performer. And, I kind of knew that, I would say, from that point forward. I was really amazed by Live in New York City. But I still didn't get the bug as hardcore as I would until I was working at a Best Buy in college. And this was around 2003, 2004. And I worked in the music section I did video games, music, computer software, that area. And I would often stock the music DVDs. And I would always put out Live in New York City, which I'd already seen, and the MTV Unplugged. And I guess at this time, Barcelona had just come out. And I remember thinking, I should pick up one of those. I know Bruce is such a great live performer. I was starting to get into watching music DVDs around that time. I should pick up one. And I was thinking about it for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I finally did pick up Live in New York City because I hadn't seen it in a few years. And I started out watching it, just watching the hit songs. I hate to admit it. And then I started going back through and, listening to the songs that I didn't know as well.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, this guy is good. And then I started just kind of going down the rabbit hole where I was researching him on Google. I came across the Backstreets website, and I think I made a post on there at one point, what's the best way to take in, the whole catalog? And everyone said start at the beginning. So around 2004, I started buying all of his albums in sequence. I got Greetings, and I listened to it for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then I got Wildly Innocent and listened to it. And I just went through in order and just kind of took in the whole catalog. And I mean, that's what did it. I was hooked. I started looking into the bootlegs, and I remember on the Backstreets forums, there were some members that were nice enough to send me my first bootleg albums. They're like, oh, you're going to love these. And they sent me, Winterland from the Darkness tour, obviously the legendary bootleg. That was the first one I had. And, the minute I heard Prove It All Night from that bootleg, there was no turning back. I had to see him live. I had to see him live as many times as I possibly could. And I was trying to get all my friends into him. And it was just I had the sickness at that point.
Can you articulate why his music spoke to you?
Definitely the lyrics. I mean, I know that's the cliche part of it. I think I also just really when I would watch the DVDs, the way he plays the guitar with so much emotion, in his face really drew me in. But I think just the lyrics, I think just the way that I was going through, I feel like I had the experience of a fan in the 70s, 30 years later, because I was taking in, all the albums in order, reading the lyrics as I went. Like I would listen to those songs over and over and just really study the lyrics. And I just felt like he just had, I mean, I was into classic rock and then, the 50s and 60s stuff as well, like I
Sure.
said. And I don't know, like he just wasn't like anybody to me. I felt he was so unique. He had such a unique sound. I remember the first time I bought Born to Run. This was actually in '05 now, because my sister was in college and she was going to the University of Iowa. And I live in Cedar Falls, which is about an hour and a half north of there. And I would go down on the weekends for Hawkeye football games. My sister was living in the dorms. And I remember I was listening to Born to Run in my car, and it was the first time I had ever heard Backstreets, I believe. And as I'm driving down there, I'm like, the intro of that song with the piano just blew me away. And then the way how the band comes in and that song just hits, you know. And I got to my sister's dorm and I went up there with the CD and I said, you have to listen to this song, Suzanne. You have to hear it. And we listened to it in her dorm room and she blared it. And like, I don't know. It was just something about the sound, even like the sound of that guitar, his unique guitar. I mean, that hooked me back in 7th grade, and it stuck with me. The thing I was going to talk about that junior high, by the way, I kind of left off with that, is so years later, my first teaching job, the person that hired me, the principal of that school, was my 9th grade U.S. history teacher at that junior high I went to. Yeah, and so I didn't even know it at the time, but as we started working together, I figured out he was into Springsteen. And so we became friends, and like we went to concerts together. We went to the show at Wrigley Field in 2012 together. And then he told me all this stuff about the staff at the junior high, like the teacher that I heard play Born to Run, where I was like, man, that's such an awesome sounding song. He told me about that. And then there was a science teacher that I had at that junior high who grew up in Freehold, New Jersey, whose older sister dated Bruce.
Oh, okay.
Like, what are the odds? You know, like I'm
Yeah.
growing up here in the middle of Iowa, and like I had no idea at the time. I learned that years later, 15 years later, that my science teacher in junior high, her older sister dated Bruce. It's just crazy when I look back on it.
That is very crazy. Gosh, so much to ask. So let me start here. I always like to preface the amount of time. I always like to say the amount of times you've seen Bruce live is not a fair barometer of how big of a fan you are. So many circumstances drive how many times you've seen him. Your age, your economic situation, where you live, this different things. So you mentioned at least one show. For the record, do you know how many times you've seen him?
Yeah, I've seen him 17 times. One of those was a show during the 2012 campaign when he did some of those like 6-song acoustic sets.
Yeah.
That was in Ames, Iowa, in like October of 2012. So I don't know if that really counts. I see him 16.
Yeah, it does.
Like,
yeah, I think you got
shows,
to count. Yeah, I think it has to count.
Yeah.
Very cool. Did as a teacher, do you throw in Springsteen references somehow?
Oh yeah. I play him whenever I can. I have the large photo of the live 75 to 85 cover that's up in my classroom. I had that up in my college apartment, and then when I got my first teaching job, I'm like, that is definitely going on the wall of my classroom, and it's been up ever since at every teaching job I've had. So the kids always ask. I'll play him in class when the kids are working. And then in history, there's been instances where I like I can bring in his songs because it's about something. Like I'll be teaching the Great Depression and I'll play Tom Joad, for example.
Exactly.
I've done that. I've done where I'm teaching the Vietnam War and I played Born in the USA. I'll be talking about protest songs and I'm like, now this didn't come out like during the war, but it's related to the war, and it's also one of the most misunderstood songs of all time, and I always give them that whole spiel, and we talk about how that connects to the war and the aftermath and everything. So yeah, I've definitely used him in the classroom. I always do a 9/11 every single year.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like being a history teacher, you have to do something on September 11th because
absolutely.
the kids might not get it otherwise.
Sure.
It's not part of my curriculum, but I always cover it, and I'll play 3 or 4 songs from The Rising.
Yeah, I just sent you, as we're talking, right, I sent you a couple of links. A couple of months ago, longer than that now, Ken Campbell, history professor at Monmouth, um, there was an article about he's doing an American history through the music of Bruce Springsteen. And so he joined me and he talked about the curriculum. It's an upper level course, and they, much like you have required reading, you had not only required reading but required listening. And so this is exactly the same thing you're talking about. Is he was using the music to talk about like the Vietnam War and other things through American history. So you might check that episode out. It was actually pretty cool.
Very cool. Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
definitely check it out.
yeah. So stories from the shows. You've said it, like how was like I would think it'd be so much fun to go to a campaign rally.
Yeah. That was pretty cool. By that point in time, I had seen him live several times. I remember at the time there wasn't like a lot of notice from what I recall. Like I found out about it just a few days ahead of time, I feel like, and it was during the week. I was teaching, and this was when I was working for that principal that was a big Bruce fan as well.
Yeah.
And I remember I turned in my request for a personal day. I'm like, you know why this is happening?
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, go for it. So I went down there, and at this point, I had already taken my wife to a couple shows, and we'll probably get into that and, her fandom of Bruce. But her favorite Springsteen song is The River. And at that point, she had never seen him play The River. I had seen him play it, but it was before I knew her. And he played The River at that show. And I had tried to convince her to go. And I'm like, he'll probably only play 5 or 6 songs, but it'll be really cool. I think she was maybe out of personal days or something, and I couldn't convince her to call in sick. So I went with my friend Jeremy, and he played The River, and I called her during it and held up my phone. And I'm like, you should have came.
Nice.
Yeah, you should have came. Yeah. But she did eventually see The River live during the 2016 tour when we saw him in St. Paul, and he did the full album. So.
Well, you mentioned you've listened to the podcast a couple times, and thank you for that. But that is where the name came from. Set listing is because when you're not at a show and you hear they're playing a song that you've been chasing or a rarity, you quit set listing and you're set listing.
Yeah.
So I bet she knew that feeling. That's awesome. Was she a fan before you got married, or did you convert her?
Totally converted her. Let's see, we started dating in 2010, so she just missed out on the Working on a Dream tour. I had gone to some shows. I guess it would have been about 6 months before we started dating. And, as she got to know me, like I would play live DVDs once in a while or videos on YouTube. I'm like, you have to see him live. Like we all say, right? Like when you see him live, you will get my obsession. And so we got married in 2012. And when they announced the Wrecking Ball tour, the first leg of the Wrecking Ball tour, like in the spring of 2012, I was floored because I don't know if you'll remember this, but there were absolutely no concert dates in the upper Midwest. Like he always plays St. Paul. There was no St. Paul show. He always plays Milwaukee, Chicago, Kansas City, St. Louis. Living in Iowa, I'm like right in the middle of all of those places. I can get to all of them in, 4 to 5 hours. And so I have an opportunity usually to see him at a lot of places. And I couldn't believe it when those tour dates came out that there was nothing within 4 to 5 hours, and especially St. Paul, because he always plays there. The closest show was in Detroit, Michigan, which is about a 10-hour drive or so. And I remember telling her, like, I'm sure he'll tour in the fall. We're getting married in July, maybe, but I would like to take you to a concert before we get married. We could do this. I'm willing to do it if you are. And she was willing to go. And this became quite the trip. If you have time, I'll tell it.
No, please do, because I need to tell you my story, and my listeners are probably going, "Oh, Jesse, don't tell the Wrecking Ball tour story again." But I have to hear it. I may cut it out, edit this out, but I have to tell you. So please tell your story, then I'll tell mine.
Okay. So this was so wild. So it seemed like this show, I bought the tickets. We had great tickets. Lower level, side stage, really, really great tickets. I think I'd upgraded them through a ticket drop, if I remember right. And so the plan was, I actually cleared this with her before we recorded this because I knew I'd tell the story. I'm like, has it been long enough? I can tell the true version of the story.
Okay, yes.
This was the time I did convince her to call in sick to work.
Okay, good.
So the way this worked is, that's a pretty long drive from where we are. So we were going to leave after she got off work one night, and we were going to drive to Chicago, which is like an easy 4-hour drive, stay the night. And then the next day, we only had 5 to 6 hour drive to Detroit.
Okay, got it, Ryan.
So it seems good. All right. So the catch was that after she got off work that night, she had a meeting at where she was working. And so we got the car all packed up, right? And we have bags in the back seat and everything. And so I drive her to the meeting, and I waited in the parking lot for her to come out, and we were hitting the road to Chicago right after she got out. So she gets in the car, and I turn the key, and the car has died. And I was not using battery power. I was not using battery power or anything. It was just dumb luck where she had that battery for 5 or 6 years or whatever, and it just died at that moment. I'm like, you have got to be kidding me. But I've paid for the tickets, the hotels, it's all prepaid on Hotwire or whatever. So her boss comes out. And we ask her boss if he'll jump her car. So he jumps the car, and while our bags are in her back seat, clearly visible.
Yeah, exactly, right?
She's calling in sick the next day, right? Okay, so we get the car started, but the problem was because the battery had died, the keys were stuck in the ignition.
Oh no.
So I'm like, we can't drive. We got to go get a new battery. So we go to an O'Reilly's Auto Parts, I think it was, and we buy a new battery, and they come out and they put it in for us. And the keys are jammed in the ignition. They will not come out. I turn off the car. They won't come out. I'm like, I can't leave my car sitting in hotel parking lots with the keys in the ignition. So we take the car to a 24-hour service shop. Now the time is ticking. We still got a 4-hour drive to Chicago.
Yeah.
It's becoming 8, 9 o'clock at night. We go there. And the guy's like, all right, so it looks like you need a new ignition.
Oh, no.
He's using graphite on the keys. He's like, he can't get them out. I'm like, are you sure this isn't just because the battery died, they just locked, we can't reset it? He's like, no, you need a new ignition, something happened. I'm like, what are we going to do? And I called my parents, and my younger brother, who was off at college, his car was still at my parents' house, and they agreed to let me drive his car to Detroit, Michigan.
Okay.
So we hit the road at after 10 o'clock at night. And I mean, we drove to Chicago. We got there 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning, got almost no sleep. And then we were on the road the next morning to Detroit. So that easy trip that was going to be driving to Chicago overnight, easy drive the next day. Well, we were driving till 3 a.m. The kicker is we get home from Detroit after the show, which was an awesome show, by the way. Totally converted her, like you would expect.
Yes.
She's seen him 5 times since then. But that was the first concert. We get home, we go into our garage. Guess what? The keys came right out of that ignition in her car.
Oh no!
Pulled them right out.
Oh, that is greatness. All right, so real quick, same thing. The Wrecking Ball tours announced, coming nowhere close to Dallas. Nowhere close to Dallas. And my wife and I had been discussing we wanted to take a vacation, just her and I. We had, we've gone on vacations with other couples. We've gone with the boy, and we're like, it's time for just you and I to go somewhere. And we were debating on what we wanted to do. We were talking about renting cabins and doing everything. And in 2011, my father had died, and he was buried in right outside of Fort Knox, Kentucky, at the Veterans Cemetery there. And so I said, okay, I got a plan, Linda. She goes, okay, what's the plan? I said, all right, we want to go to see my dad's gravestone. We haven't seen that yet. It's now out. I said, and Bruce is going to play in Cleveland, Ohio. I said, so we could go to Kentucky, see my dad's gravesite. I said, when we were there for my dad's funeral, she had picked up a brochure about the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. I said we could do 3 or 4 visits of the distilleries at the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. I have a good friend who lives in Columbus, Ohio. We could see Charles and Lori, have dinner with them. And then a really great friend of mine, Tom, lives in Cleveland. We can go to Cleveland. Tom will let us stay with him. He'd thrill us. We can see Bruce, go to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, then drive back, do the rest of the bourbon tour, and come home. She says, absolutely great. Let's do it. And that's what we did. And we called it our Bruce and Bourbon Tour.
Nice.
It, you know, and this was only the second show she'd ever seen. She had seen him in 2002 at the Rising Tour, and that was the first time I saw him. But she didn't know any of the songs, right? Like, I mean, she, Working on the Highway, he may have done, and, of course, Born to Run, but she didn't know any of the songs. And so we both, like, I started walking so that I would be less winded. I'm not someone who likes exercise, so I was walking, and then she got the Wrecking Ball CD and listened to it over and over again. And then I gave her other songs that he may play so that she would know what was going on. And so when we came back, we had a great time, and we fell in love with the Kentucky and that part of Kentucky and bourbon distilleries. So when he came back, like you said, after leaving Europe, like, okay, he's touring again, and I called her at work. I'm like, okay, Bruce is in Louisville. Buy tickets. So we drove back up and then saw him in Louisville for the second half of the Wrecking Ball tour. So yeah, absolutely,
Nice.
That's great. The only thing we did close is we went after we did the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame all day, and we decided, okay, we spent the day with Tom, and we saw his parents, and we said, okay, we're going to drive a couple of hours heading toward Lexington, and we'll get a hotel room, and then we'll get a fresh start in the morning. And so we were driving, and we were talking, and we were listening to music, and Linda's like, are you tired? No, I'm not tired. And so we drove all night through. Got like in Lexington like at 5 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning. And Linda's like, if Chris did this, I would have his ass. This is so stupid. We've done this all night. But, we were just enjoying, visiting and everything. Then the hotel would not give us a reservation. They're like, your reservation's for tonight. I said, well, technically it is this day. No, checkout's in at 3. I'm like, well, I see 3 or 4 reservations that no one's picked up. Yes, but what if they show up? I'm like, who's going to show up? You did. So we ended up having to find another hotel room, and the lady's like, okay, I'm not charging you for tonight. Just go. I'm going to tell housekeeping not to wake you up. So not quite as fun as your trip, but it was a memorable trip.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's awesome.
Yeah, it was quite the story. That summer, my wife, she surprised me. She took the ticket stubs from that Detroit show, and at our rehearsal dinner for our wedding, she actually had that custom made to be like the top of the cake.
Oh, how
really cool! Yeah.
That's neat. That is very neat. Bruce song in the reception?
Oh yeah. Our first dance was Happy off of Tracks.
Nice.
And in our slideshow, we had Tougher Than the Rest.
Very nice.
Dance to Thunder Road at one point as well, I know.
That's
I think Secret Garden. Yeah, I mean there was a lot. I do remember the DJ at the end of the night. I was a few drinks in. I remember I had told him to play another Bruce song, and I remember him kind of joking like, another Bruce Springsteen song or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yes.
Yeah.
Look, dude. Yes, it is. That's great. Another story from a show, because that one's pretty. That's tough to. That's tough
pretty
to
wild,
top.
right?
Yeah, that's tough to top.
Yeah. So I was thinking about who I went to most of the early shows with before I met my wife, and you mentioned Bruce and bourbon, which made me think of this. So in college, 2 of my best friends, Jeremy and Micah, we would get together every week almost, and we did what we called Bruce and beer, where we would drink a bunch of beer and watch a concert DVD, whether it was the official ones or the bootlegs. I had a lot of them. Yeah. And like every week we'd watch something different. And I would say I converted both of them into being big Bruce fans, especially my friend Jeremy. Me and my friend Jeremy went to so many shows together, and hopefully we will again.
Yeah.
But this was like '05, so I had just missed, when I really got into Bruce, I had just missed the Rising tour, and I kicked myself for years about it because, when you look back now, it was only 4 years between the Magic tour and the Rising tour, but like I had just gotten into him in like '04, so it felt like the longest wait ever to see the E Street Band, and that's why I hit so many shows, like, because I was telling myself, all right, when they tour again, I'm going to as many as I possibly can. And the first show, so I had thought about going to the Vote for Change tour like at the end of '04, but that was really before my friends also got into them. That was pretty early in my fandom or my hardcore fandom, I guess you could say. And then in '05, I had thought about going up to Minneapolis to see him on the Devils and Dust tour, but it was like really late notice. There weren't many seats left,
Right.
and I didn't know about drops or anything at that point. So I didn't go to that. So the first time I saw him was with my sister and my friend Jeremy on the Seeger Sessions tour in Des Moines.
Oh, nice.
That was the only show I saw on that tour. But then the Magic tour, I went to, gosh, I don't know how many. Let's see, six or seven. I think 6 shows on the Magic tour. And like my buddy Jeremy, who was involved in the Bruce and Beer routine, like he went to almost all of those shows with me. My buddy Micah went. My mom and dad went to a couple of them. It was. I revere the Magic tour. Like that was such a great tour for me, just to finally see the E Street Band. I actually still personally think that that's his best album of the 2000s, like even ahead of the Rising. I love that album. Kind of a hot take there, I know. But
No. I agree. I absolutely agree, and it's a modern classic. What I love about the story, right, is you're proving what I've often said. Couple things. One, I had a guy on last year one time, and he talked about he saw Bruce during the time of the Landau article. Like he isn't saying he was there that night, but that time frame, around that time, and he looked at his girlfriend at the time and said, "We're never going to see this guy ever this close up or this cheap again." And as he was telling the story, he says, "And I just regret all the shows I didn't get to see, like when he was just starting out, like, what we didn't see." And that made me come up with the theory that no matter when you find Bruce, you regret all the shows you didn't see, right? Like this guy, you could say he's been seeing him since 75. He's seen tons of them. The other story I give, Ryan, is in football, like if you miss the extra point, it seems like you chase that point the whole game.
Right.
That's what I feel like a Bruce show. Like if you miss a show, like you're now chasing that show. You'll never catch up because I didn't get to see him on the Rising tour, so therefore I'm trying to catch on. Back then, when Magic and Working on a Dream, when he came to Dallas and he came to Houston, I had not reached the point in my mind where, like, well, if he's not coming to the Dallas area, you could drive to see him. And in fact, we had that discussion. I told Linda, I said, just once, I'd like to go to more than one show, a tour. And she's like, well, do you want to do that enough to give up Dragon Con? Which is a big pop culture in Atlanta every Labor Day weekend. I'm like, yeah, I give up Dragon Con. So now I make the joke that if Bruce is touring, I don't go to Dragon Con. If he's not touring, I get to go to Dragon Con. And this year, unfortunately, I got to do neither because of the COVID.
Yeah.
So I just want to change the subject just for a little bit. Talk to me about Top Rope Nation. Talk to me about your podcast a little bit.
Yeah, so I had always wanted to start my own podcast. And in fact, when I was in college, I majored in electronic media for a couple of years, and I really, really enjoyed it. But the field of like audio and video production, the job opportunities are like very scarce, and I got a little bit worried about finding work out of school. I was able to parlay a lot of the classes that I did for electronic media into a journalism minor, which is why I do a lot of the writing on the side now. But I loved the audio aspect of it. I loved like performing on microphone, and I had been covering the wrestling industry for many years. I started doing this in high school, at the time unpaid, but like writing as much as I could about it. And I was involved with some websites in like the mid 2000s. It was really before podcasts took off, but they were doing like online radio shows. And I did a few of those, and I was really pushing this website to, we should do this like weekly. And they were kind of hesitant. And then I stopped writing for that website, and I kind of got out of writing about wrestling for a long time. And then around 2014, I started doing a lot of freelance writing for various websites. I did a freelance article for Sports Illustrated, whatculture.com, inquisitor.com, all kinds of websites. And then I eventually started my own website, and it was called Top Rope Press. And I ran this site for almost 4 years. And within that website, I decided like this was the vehicle to launch my podcast finally, right? So we did Top Rope Nation was the tie-in with the website. And it was a ton of fun. And I had a writer on staff named Kyle, who now is one of my good friends. And he had done a little bit of podcasting before, like in college. So he had experience in that. And then my friend Justin, who I had known since I was in high school, who's actually from the same area I am, also a big wrestling fan. We all just kind of got together and started the show. So like me and Kyle started it, and we did it for about 6 months. And then at one point I needed a sub host, and my friend Justin had been like a diehard listener and would always give me feedback. I'm like, hey, you want to just come on the show? And he did. And, he fit right in, did a great job. And we kind of just made it a trio. And, so pretty much since, the summer of 2016, we've been doing at least one show a week. For a few months, we did two shows per week. And been doing it for a long time. And I guess it was earlier this year we got signed to be part of the Blue Wire podcasting network, which was really, really exciting for us. It's like one of the largest sports podcasting networks growing in the U.S. right now. They have like Greg Olson from the NFL does a show on the network. Ian Happ from the Chicago Cubs, Megan Rapinoe from soccer. They've got all kinds of names on there. I think they just signed an official deal with the Baltimore Ravens to like produce their official podcast. So it's just such a great opportunity for us to get our show out in front of more listeners. I think the biggest or the hardest part about doing a podcast is, finding the listeners, especially in the wrestling industry. There are so many wrestling podcasts. Sometimes it's kind of hard to, stand out from the bunch. You get big interviews, or, you have to have the personality, or break news that nobody else is talking about, rumors on what's going on backstage in the wrestling industry, that kind of thing. So I'd say like growth has been the biggest challenge, but we've seen steady growth now for several years. And the most important part is we enjoy doing it. Us three that do it, we're good friends off air too. And I think, or I hope that, that real relationship that myself and Kyle and Justin have, that it really comes across on the air. And I think that's what makes our show such a fun listen for people.
Yeah, once again, I'm repeating myself, and I apologize, listeners, but when I first started this, when I started doing podcasting, Linda was like, I don't get it. Like, why would anyone want to hear you talk? And I'm like, oh, thanks. But I said the important thing is, and her brother, Ralph, grew up in the heyday of the 60s with, the teenage garage band, right? And he did all that. And he said that, if he had anything, if he could do anything, he would show up on Sunday with a bunch of buddies, just plug in their amps and play music in the barn to an audience of none, just to enjoy themselves. And I said, that's what this is to me. And I enjoy talking to guests. I enjoy talking Bruce Springsteen and music with a variety of guests. So I like people to listen. I want to be more successful. I want to have more downloads. But mostly this is just about me getting the chance to talk to people and kind of, share my passion for Bruce and his music. Why wrestling? Have you always been a fan?
Yeah, it kind of came from my dad. I grew up watching wrestling with my dad, and I would say most of my life I've watched it. There's been a few periods where I kind of fell out of it, but I was still like kind of keeping up with what was going on, either, through friends at school or the internet later on in my life. But I've just always been really fascinated by the wrestling industry and, like the workings of it and the creative aspect of it. I know, like, for some people, they just really don't get it. Like, why do you watch something that's not real? Well, it's a performance. It's like why you watch a TV show or a movie,
exactly.
or like sometimes a good comparison is like figure skating, right? Like it's a performance that you're kind of grading in your mind. Like, what makes a great wrestling match? I think wrestling at its best is one of the great American art forms. And, a lot of my friends were into wrestling growing up. Being born in the mid 80s, we kind of lived through the heyday of Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage and Roddy Piper and Andre. And then, later on when I was in high school, it was The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin and all of that. So like two really big kind of boom periods for wrestling. And, no, I mean, it's just kind of always been a part of my life. And, I always kind of wanted to do something, like to either be involved in the industry myself or cover the industry in some way. And I guess, just kind of through some connections that I made and friendships I made, I was able to get opportunities in writing about the industry. And, it started out on very small websites and eventually like some bigger websites until, I found myself today writing for CBS Interactive at comicbook.com covering wrestling. So it's been quite the journey, but I mean, to make a little bit of side money covering something I've watched since I was a little kid it's pretty exciting. It's fun.
So when I told Chris that I was going to talk to a Bruce fan that also did a wrestling podcast, he said, "Are you going to tell him our WrestleMania story? Are you going to tell him our WrestleMania story?" So this is for Chris Jackson. Chris adored, always from the moment he loved Goldberg, and I mean, he was born in '89, so this is his, the early '90s, mid '90s, his go-to period. And we live in Dallas, Texas, and WrestleMania 17 was going to be in Houston at the Astrodome. And he's like, "Oh, I would do anything to go to WrestleMania." And I'm like, "Okay, tell you what, you get straight A's on your report card, we'll go to WrestleMania." "You promise? You promise?" So I bought tickets immediately. I look over at Linda, I'm like, "Okay, he wants it this much, we can do this, we're gonna go." So he tells the story to this day about us driving down to Houston. It was the first time he'd gone to a Hooters to eat dinner. We watched. The Rangers had just signed Alex Rodriguez, so we were watching a spring training game, in the hotel room. We went to the whole, the big show beforehand. I forgot what they call it now.
Access.
Yeah, Access.
Yeah.
So he did that, and he's got a picture of him in front of the Undertaker's bike, and he's like, so we're there. It's so crowded. It's so crazy. And he's like, "Dad, can I shoot the finger?" "Yes, you may shoot the finger."
Oh, man.
And Stone Cold turns heel. And just he tells that story. And about every couple of years, he will, after he's had a couple of beers, "Dad, and he'll pull it up on YouTube and like, "We were there, Dad, we were there." So that's our WrestleMania story.
That's awesome, because that is arguably the greatest WrestleMania of all time to a lot of people. I don't know if you know that or not, but that show is like really highly regarded as one of the greatest events they've ever done.
I understood that after the fact, right? And he had a blast. He enjoyed it, and so and as I said, he probably listens to the wrestlers' theme songs and their entrance music all the time on his. That's what would play most on his phone. So that's awesome. Yeah. So, and every once in a while, there are things that we do. Um, when he was looking for, he had graduated from college and he was working for the same company I was, and he was up for kind of a promotion, and he's like, Dad, I've been doing my job. I'm looking for some money, and so I pulled up from the Seeger session, pay me my money down.
Hmm.
And so I played it. He goes, that's it, Dad. And so now then, anytime he's up for either of us up for promotion or it's annual review time, he'll send it. He'll send a link. Pay me my money down.
Nice.
And then anytime he's feeling uncomfortable or feeling self doubt, because he had showed us the Undertaker, miniseries they just had.
Hmm.
And with Triple H going, remember who the hell you are. Remember that phrase, and so I'll do that to Chris a lot. So, yeah,
Life lessons from pro wrestling. There you go.
There you go. What can you do? What do you want to do? Where do you want the podcast to go? What are future plans?
I would say just we'd like to do more in the way of interviews, really, which is what you do.
Yeah.
I mean, just getting more people from the wrestling industry on the show. Wrestling kind of has this reputation of being like this very kind of secretive, closed off industry, and it still kind of is that way. I mean, they are more open with the media than they used to be, and I get to talk to a lot of. I've interviewed several WWE stars for written articles over on comicbook.com where I write, but it's a little bit harder to get them to open up these people to do audio interviews for podcasting. So you kind of got to get on they have like a media list, and you got to get on that list kind of where they'll send you the stars, to get them on your show. And I'd like to do a little more of just kind of interviewing some of these bigger names from the wrestling industry on our show. We do a lot of stuff as far as we talk about what's going on backstage. We know people in the company, so we can kind of talk to what's being discussed backstage for like creative angles on television moving forward. And we do a lot of like retro shows where we look back at older moments from like the 80s and 90s on wrestling, and we have a ton of fun with that stuff. But I think that the area for growth for sure is just to do more in the way of interviews. And we've had some people on, like we had Jim Ross on a few months ago, and that was
nice.
a ton of fun. Yeah, that was a great interview. But definitely I'd like to do that more, a couple of times a month.
Oh, that sounds cool. That sounds real cool. How did you end up getting on the TCV Cast?
So I was just a listener, and Justin, who hosts the show, I had seen him post on this Elvis fan forum over the years before, so I was kind of familiar with him before he launched the podcast. Like similar to Backstreets or Greasy Lake and the Bruce community, there's the Elvis for Collectors forum. And I'd been on that pretty much as long as Backstreets. And he had made a post at one point that he was, going to launch the podcast. And I remember I sent him a DM on there saying, oh, I have some experience podcasting. I'd already been doing Top Rope Nation for a couple of years. And I'm like, if you ever need any help, let me know. And I listened to the show for the first several months, and he had just kind of offhand said on one of the shows that his co-host, Gurdeep, was going to be out the next week. And I kind of thought in my mind, all right, this is my chance. So I sent him a message. I'm like, well, if you're looking for a guest co-host, I wouldn't mind coming on. And I've been a listener. I've been a listener since episode 1. And he's like, yeah, definitely. So I came on, and I guess he thought I did a good job or I fit in really well. And I've been on it many, many times since then. So I really, really look forward to doing that one. With Top Rope Nation. I love doing that one too, but I also do all the back end stuff. I produce it, I mix it, and I mean, it's a lot of work. I like coming on TCB Cast where all I have to do is just talk about Elvis.
That sounds really nice. Yes, I absolutely know what you're saying.
People don't realize, like, mixing a podcast, how much work goes into that. It is a lot of work. Underappreciated, I think.
And as I talked about, right, like, I do not do a lot of editing for that reason, but I do clean up the beginning. You add in the intro, the outro. And a lot of my time is prospecting and finding guests and coordinating guests and making sure that and I do it with a lot of love. I mean, it's what do, but I have a Google Calendar that has all my guest spots, and I have an Excel file like, okay, who have I scheduled to talk to, what time, and have I edited, when is it going to upload, and what's my calendar? So yeah, um, it's a labor of love, but it is labor.
Yes, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. All right, so back to Bruce. You've kind of mentioned a little bit of songs that you played at your wedding, but songs or albums that mean a lot to you.
I would say definitely that Born to Run and Darkness mean a lot. I'd say that Darkness is my favorite album, and I think probably because I was in college when I was getting so hardcore into Bruce, and I mean like any college student, I think you have a lot of ups and downs in your relationships throughout college, and I just felt like Darkness on the Edge of Town. I just connected to that album during that point in my life on so many levels so well that that one just really means a lot to me. I think Born to Run was the album that when I was going through, the lineage in order, I think that was the one kind of like where I shared the story about Backstreets that really pulled me in and hooked me on the music. But I think from a personal connection, certainly Darkness is right at the top. And then also just Magic, because I look back on Magic as being, that's the tour where I finally got to, experience the E Street Band. And that was the album I was waiting years for, when's the next E Street album coming out so I can finally see them, like I will always have such great memories of the Magic tour and that album as well. So I would say those three are for me like the biggest connections.
Do thoughts on the latest two songs?
Oh, love them. I I,
Yeah,
I think I was really excited to hear the E Street Band on record and like such a kind of guitar driven song right off the bat. Like it's the classic E Street Band sound, and I think the negative obviously is that if we would have heard this any other year, we'd be thinking, all right, like we've got a tour coming. Now
yeah,
it's just like, how long do I have to wait for that tour? Time's ticking kind of
yeah,
thing. The band's
absolutely.
getting older, and I think that from what we've heard so far, which is the two songs that have been released, I think they'll translate well live.
Hmm.
And I've listened to them and the videos. I think
Yeah.
it's good stuff.
Ryan, have you got a chance to listen to the E Street Radio, kind of his DJ sessions?
That is something I haven't really dove into so much yet.
Hmm.
I actually just got access to the online listening. For
Yeah,
whatever reason, I would always renew my Sirius, and I'd always try to get a deal on it,
yeah, sure.
and I'd get the good deal for like 6 months or whatever, but they would never include the online listening. And I
Yeah,
finally have the online listening, so I need to go back, and I know they're all on demand, so I
yeah.
need to listen to them.
I ended up calling uh, when he was talk about the Wrecking Ball tour. He was opening there at the Apollo, right? And they were gonna do it
Hmm.
live. And like a day before, okay, how much is it to have online listening? So can I go listen because on the PC? And so that's good. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, what when he tours again, from your mouth to God's ear? Are there songs you haven't heard live that you want to hear?
Yes. Streets of Fire has been on my list
Oh,
for a
nice.
long time. And I mentioned my friend Jeremy earlier, who I've gone to a ton of shows with. And we went to the show on the Magic Tour in St. Paul, the second one in St. Paul. It was March 16th, 2008. And I remember I tried to convince my friend Jeremy to go the next night, St. Patty's Day in Milwaukee. And we were both in college at the time, or just getting out of college, and it was a lot, to buy tickets for two nights in a row, hotel, all that. And he was hesitant, so we didn't go. We only went to the St. Paul show, and sure enough, in Milwaukee, he played Streets of Fire. I've been chasing that one for a while. That's up there. I've seen Prove It a lot. I was so pumped when he brought back the '78 version of Prove It All Night, and I mentioned my boss at my first teaching job that we went to the Wrigley Field show together. Well, he went to both shows at Wrigley Field. I was only able to get tickets to the second night. And as people may recall, on the first night, I think it was the first song of the show, he did Prove It with the 78 intro. And I was not very happy about that, that I missed out. And, you know, I've seen him play Prove It since then, including on tours where like once in a while he would do the Darkness style, but he never did it at any of the shows I was at. So I'd love to see that in person. I'd love to see Streets of Fire. I think those are the two that I haven't seen that really come to mind. I've been lucky in that I've seen a lot of the songs that were rare, like right off the bat. The second time I saw the E Street Band, I saw Incident, and like this was in '07. It was still pretty rare at that point in time. And I was also at the famous St. Louis show in 2008, and there was tons of rarities at that one. I never thought in a million years I'd ever see him do Drive All Night. I loved Drive All Night ever since I first heard The River, and I think at that point in time he had only played it like once or twice since the River tour, and he's played it many times now, you know, obviously since, but to hear that in '08, I was like, I remember seeing Bruce going around the stage like doing the driving motion with his hands because it was a sign request, and I couldn't believe it when that song kicked on. So I think I've been really lucky in the shows that I have seen, like seeing some of the rarities that I would be on my list, but those are the ones that come to mind that I would be chasing on the next tour.
All right, so Ryan, what have I not asked you that I should have?
Ooh, that's a good question. Let's see. Well, I was trying to think if there's anything else about the live shows I was gonna throw in. I actually pulled up all of my concerts on My Boss Time, just so I had all the set lists in front of me.
Very nice. This podcast brought to you by My Boss Time. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, actually, here's a funny story. So I thought you might ask if I'd ever talked to any people in the wrestling industry that were Bruce fans.
Oh, absolutely. I've heard Mick Foley is.
Oh yeah.
And I would love to have Mick Foley on the podcast and talk Bruce. I mean, I'm sorry, Mick, we're not going to talk any wrestling. I would probably have to tell him about when Chris once again stood in line to have he pulled the sock off his foot so that Mick would sign it, Mr. Socko. But anyway, so yes.
Well, if I ever get him on Top Rope Nation, I'll send him your way.
All right, sounds great. Very nice.
Yeah. No, he's a huge fan, and Michael Cole, who's an announcer on WWE, is a very, very big Bruce fan as well. But the one that comes to mind, and it's connected to that St. Louis show, is in the summer of 2008. It was actually the same day I had gotten tickets to the St. Louis show.
Right.
There's a Wrestling Hall of Fame here in Iowa that brings in a lot of big stars. It's called the Luthez George Tragos Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. And I go every year. And that year in the summer of '08, Bret the Hitman Hart and Rowdy Roddy Piper were here.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and so Bret Hart was my hero growing up in the wrestling industry.
That movie, the documentary In the Shadows, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Wrestling with Shadows.
Yeah, I adored that. For the longest time, Chris was like, that's your favorite wrestler? I go, I guess he is. That is my favorite wrestler.
Yeah. So, I loved him. And over the years, I kind of got to know him a little bit in a roundabout way. And we talked on the phone several times. And then when he came to town for the Hall of Fame in '08, we met up at the hotel bar, and I sat there for probably 3 to 4 hours drinking beers with Bret Hart and Roddy Piper.
That is cool. That is so cool.
And so I think I had read an interview where Bret had mentioned Bruce or something one time, and I was pretty jacked about going to the show in St. Louis the next month, and then I was also going to Harley Fest in Milwaukee like a week after the St. Louis show. But like I said, I had gotten the St. Louis tickets that morning. Then that night I'm drinking with Bret Hart and Roddy Piper. And I mentioned to Bret, like, so you're a big, I think I read somewhere you're a Bruce Springsteen fan. And he said, yeah. And I told him I got those good tickets for St. Louis the next month. And he asked me about that. And then I said, did you ever have a chance to meet Springsteen? And he told me a story about Bam Bam Bigelow, who was from Asbury Park, New Jersey. There's actually a photo out there of Bruce with Bam Bam Bigelow at a wrestling show. He said that he was out with Bam Bam one time, and across the bar was Bruce, and he said Bruce was looking at him like he kind of recognized him, or he could tell that like maybe he recognized him, but he wasn't sure for sure. Maybe he knew who he was, but he wasn't sure. And eventually, like, he called him over and they talked a little bit. So he told me the story about meeting Bruce, and I thought that was cool that, my hero growing up was a big Bruce Springsteen fan too.
That is a very cool story. That is so nice. All right, before I let you go, I got to ask you the Mary question. So for those of you who this is your first podcast, welcome. But to catch you up, Jay Armstrong, who has been on the show multiple times, is an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area. And once every year, his seniors, during the school year, they take 2 days and they break apart Thunder Road as a poem. They go through all the lyrics. They talk about the imagery of the song. They talk about the themes, compare it to Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. And at the end of the 2 days, he looks at his class and says, "Does Mary get in the car?" So, Ryan, as tradition on the Set Listing Bruce podcast, your question is, does Mary get in the car?
So there's so much pressure on this question. I've been thinking about this all day. I was even talking about this with my wife just after dinner tonight. I'm like, so what do you think about Thunder Road? Does she get in the car? She looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, all right, I'm going to play it. So I played it on the Alexa.
Yeah.
And like, so what do you think? And, she's heard the song multiple times. We never really thought about it like that.
Right.
I was looking at this in two different ways. So just the way that Bruce has talked about the song over the years and it being kind of like, the welcoming to the album. And
yes,
it's hard to imagine that she wouldn't get in the car, right? But then I feel like you can make this work either way. So I was looking at it in the form of like a longer form story on the album itself. And so like, okay, so let's say that she does get in the car. So then what's the next song on Born to Run? 10th Avenue, right? And 10th Avenue, I guess, is kind of a song about how he's kind of frustrated a little bit, maybe professionally, and then it's the story of the band, right? He's kind of talking about the growth of the band. So he goes from having this night out with this girl in Thunder Road to in 10th Avenue. Now he's back to trying to make it as a rock and roll singer. But then you get to Night, and then on Night, he's talking about, all right, he's at his 9-to-5 job, and he can't wait to get off and go see this girl, which could be Mary, from the first song, who knows? But then, like, he's still not making it in his rock and roll career. And then you get to Backstreet, which is kind of like a song about, like a broken relationship. They're having this heart-to-heart conversation. And maybe he's kind of explaining to her that, or he's given her the long story, which is ultimately going to lead to he's going to leave. He's got to get out of here. He's just not making it with his band, or he's not making it with his dream. And then you get to Born to Run, and he leaves. But then he's still thinking about her. And then you got She's the One, right? Maybe I need to go back. And then you get to Meeting Across the River, and Meeting Across the River is, like he's kind of getting to this shady underworld. But he's still got to get back to that girl, and that's what he does, when you get to Jungle Land. So I guess the question is it the same girl throughout Born to Run, or are these different girls? But I think you can make that narrative work either way. Like if she doesn't get in the car, I think the narrative still works, and it's a different girl maybe that he's going out to meet once you get to track 3 with Night, and maybe he meets that girl, and that girl leads into Backstreets. I don't know, that maybe that's a little deep, but
no, I love that answer. That is a great answer. I've never had that answer before, so absolutely great, wonderful job.
I would say though, if pressed, I'd say she got in the car.
Okay, very good, very nice. Ryan, this is great. We're gonna have to have you on again.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Any final thoughts you want to share?
I mean, just check out Top Rope Nation. Any of the listeners out there that are into the wrestling industry or have ever been into it, because like I say, we talk about classic wrestling as well. Search Top Rope Nation on any of the podcasting platforms. You can find us. The show's on Twitter also at Top Rope Nation, and then check out my friends over at Tcv Cast if you are into the history of Elvis's musical career or his movie career. They do a lot of good stuff. I will be on that show I think the next 2 weeks as well. So
Very nice.
you want to hear me talking about Elvis Presley, check out upcoming episodes of the TCB Cast, and you can find me on Twitter. It is at Ryan Droste. That is Droste.
Very nice. Ryan, I thank you so much for taking time to visit with me. I had a blast. This was so much fun. We'll have to have you back on again when the new album comes out and we've got the documentary, and hopefully sometime in 2021 we can meet at a show.
That would be great. I'd love it.
Yes. All right, listeners, please stay safe. Remember to social distance. Wash your hands. Wear an effing mask. And be good to each other because God knows we need to be. For now, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you soon. This podcast would not be possible without the support of my wonderful patrons. I want to say thank you to Mary Thomas, Terry Smith, Dale Hozek, Elizabeth Brunson, Stephen Malio, Anna Lynn, Steve Rogers, Hollick McMillian, and Chris Bloom. All of you are wonderful people. I appreciate you so much, and thank you for supporting the podcast.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.